thank you so much for everyone who has signed up and also showed up. You're very welcome to our SAC Carolinas event. And together we are joined by Jonas. And my name is Zakarias, and I'm a business intern at SAC Carolinas for this semester. And together with me, I also have Sophie, and she's also an intern here at the Carolinas. And today's webinar is covering the topic recruitment. And we will actually look at it on two different perspectives, the managerial perspective and the individual perspective. But this webinar will focus mainly on the managerial perspective. But if anyone has any questions during the webinar, please use the reactions and just raise your hand. And whenever we have a time slot for the questions, we will let you ask them. So whenever something comes up, just use the reactions, raise your hand, and then I'll give you the word for the questions. But without further ado, Jonas, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. And so, hi everyone, delighted to be here today. As Zakarias mentioned, my name is Jonas Hedin. Give a quick introduction. I'm originally from Sweden. I grew up about 20 minutes north of Stockholm, pretty close to Arlanda Airport. I grew up playing golf. I moved here to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live today in 2004 to play college golf. Played here for 4 years. 2 weeks before I was supposed to move home to Sweden, I met my now wife. And so I decided to hang around for a couple more years. And here I still am 18 years later. I ended up playing professional golf for about 6 years after college. And then from there, I transitioned into the business world in the field of recruiting. And so I've been in it now for about 7 years. Essentially worked for two firms. I worked for a contingency firm and now Coleman Luke Kenny Bowen, which is a retained executive search firm. And I'm a managing partner here in our Charlotte, North Carolina office. Previously on the board of SAC Carolinas, so I know some of you already, but that's a little bit about me. I have an 8-year-old son too, still a big golf fan. And so I was consumed by the Masters all weekend. I hope some of you watched too. So there you have it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jonas. And I think we could even have a webinar for you where you tell us about your golf career. But today's topic will be recruitment in today. And we're going to focus and try to understand how we can find those top talents in today's labor market. It's very difficult, but Jonas will try to guide us. This webinar will be very interactive. I'll ask Jonas questions and he'll give us a reply. And as I mentioned before, just raise your hand if you have any follow-up questions on the questions I'm asking. But my first question for you, Jonas, is could you provide us with an overview of the current status of the labor market and what companies are facing from a recruitment standpoint?
Definitely. Here, I'm going to share my screen here for a few minutes as we go through some of these questions here. So already covered the introduction. You mentioned labor market, right? So I think it's important as we sort of seek to understand this talent war that companies are facing out there. If we take a quick look at sort of the labor market report, these are some of the end of March numbers that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment is about 3.6%. It's declined by 0.2 percentage points, or about 6 million individuals in the US currently unemployed, with a labor participation rate, as you can see, of 62.4%. Now, those are the civilian numbers, right? And so the reason for showing this to you is, the labor market is pretty much back to what it was at pre-pandemic levels. Very, very little change. If you compare it to February of 2020, we were looking at about 3.5% and or 5.7 million individuals in the unemployment category. And so we've largely returned to pre-pandemic levels. And this concept of a talent war or shortage for top talent is something we've seen for years. It's not a pandemic issue. I think the pandemic has exacerbated some of the challenges that companies are facing, but this was a sort of a challenge they were facing beforehand. some of the key insights, if we look at sort of the demographic breakdown, very little has changed in terms of the male versus female ratios, and other demographic characteristics largely has stayed the same through the pandemic. If we look at sort of the number of workers that are working remotely, that level is at 10%, down from 13% compared to prior month in February of 2022. Now, keep in mind, so that is a number of folks that were in the office working face-to-face in person pre-pandemic and who are now remote, right? So the remote option is something that has increased for workers out there. And if we kind of look at some industries, it's natural to understand that the biggest rebound is occurring in the leisure, hospitality, restaurants, and retail sectors. But we're also seeing good job growth across business, services, and manufacturing as well. So that's just a bit of backstory as kind of what's leading to the current situation, right? Where companies are really struggling to find top talent, and it goes throughout all levels of an organization. Although I will say that kind of that entry level, lower skilled labor is what tends to be the hardest to find when you're doing high volume recruitment. Candidates out there are still, gunning for top jobs. And, for instance, if we're managing a posting for a big CFO job in a major metropolitan area, we can still get thousands of applicants over, a day or two. And so that's kind of what companies are facing out there today.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I gotta say, it's really nice to see that we have a low unemployment rate. However, I understand that there's a big issue to find these top talents. My next question for you, Jonas, is can you shed some light on the term the Great Resignation and what this means for companies?
Yeah, it's a good one. So it's sort of a term that surfaced through the pandemic, right? The Great Resignation, people thinking and hearing that workers are just quitting in droves and taking early retirements and going living on a beach somewhere. And that may not be occurring, right? So what we're seeing is that those numbers are largely the same as they were before, as the number of people that are retiring. I think the population growth we know is flattening a little bit. And so particularly in the US, people are choosing to have fewer children. And so that will increase sort of this talent shortage going forward. But I would almost refer to it as more as the sort of the great reshuffle, right? And so people aren't resigning and then, leaving the workforce. They are resigning to take different other more attractive opportunities. So it's really more of a reshuffle than it is, this great, resignation or people quitting in droves. And it's really on an individual basis. I think the pandemic has shed a light on, a poor manager might be a even worse manager during the pandemic. A struggling business might struggle even more. And so I think that the timelines of people resigning and taking a new job has maybe increased a little bit. So if you hear the term Great Resignation, it's really more of a reshuffle. People are taking different jobs than what they had today.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of people can relate to the issues we've encountered during Corona. My next question for you, Jonas, is how can companies proactively better their position with future candidates?
Yeah, it's a really important question here, and I think one we're spending a bit of time on. As we think about what a company is doing from a recruitment and talent perspective, I really encourage, if you're a small business, if you're a giant global company, you should treat this almost the same as you do your business development and sales activity. So this is all about you manage your brand and your reputation, and your company is essentially the product that you are selling to candidates out there in the marketplace. And so there's a few things that you can do to work on this, and really it should be the same, whether you're a giant company or a small, 3-person team. There are things that you can do, right? One, I would say, really define and understand your company culture and what value proposition you are selling to candidates. If you're a big global giant company, maybe it is the career track you can have inside your business, right? Maybe it is the number of opportunities and ability to run big P&Ls and manage, big factories, or a large workforce. If it's a small company, maybe it's work-life balance. Maybe it's the ability to wear a lot of hats. Just understand your culture and really what your kind of value proposition is, because the candidate that's out there that's right for you will be attracted by those values and what you're really presenting to them. Other piece I would say is I put it on here in the slide, so incorporate talent programs. Historically, the well-known academy companies, they do this extremely well, right? They will run career programs with universities and internships where a worker can come from finishing up their degree and through internships really get sort of onboarded into an organization and take advantage of some of those early career development opportunities. And, stories are endless of, we interview an executive that's worked for a company for 20 years. But guess what? They had 15 jobs during those 20 years because the company was really good at showing them different learning opportunities. They got promoted within the ranks. So every couple of years, there's sort of a new challenge to tackle and something new to do. So I would say the more a business can incorporate these types of things, the better chance they will have to retain and really recruit, strong candidates, particularly early career candidates. Third point, I would say sort of your key talent metrics. Would encourage any business to sort of track these and understand what matters to your business. For a small business, maybe it's much more qualitative. If somebody leaves, really doing a good job of running an exit interview so we understand why did the person leave, and try to look in the mirror during those times, because it's pretty easy to say, well, the person quit and took another job, that was really on them. But do we understand why that happened? And what are some learnings that we can really take from that? And then I would also say this sort of brand marketing and reputation is becoming more and more common to really present yourself as if you are talking to a customer and sell yourself like you do, in business development. Do you have a good website? Does it look nice? Is it easy for candidates to understand what you do in your company? Does your office, is it a welcoming place to come interview and then ultimately work at? So there's a couple of things there I think you can do. Obviously, there are now sites that will also kind of manage reputation marketing for candidates like a Glassdoor and other places where you can go look at reviews, right? So I would really just encourage to treat it like a business development activity. And then I would say once you do have to jump in and recruit new people, really have a plan in place that your key stakeholders in the organization have really bought into. So whether it's your direct manager, owners, HR team members, others that would participate in the interview process, make sure people are prepared and know what their different roles should be in the recruitment process, right? So those are a couple of high level things I think you can kind of take ownership of and really manage internally.
Thank you so much for the answer. I think it was very interesting how you explained the perspective as selling your company and seeing it as a marketing way, and also understanding the value proposition. I think a lot of you out there can take this with you and try to understand what's your value proposition, what can be good candidates. That's very interesting, Jonas. My next question for you is, what should you do as a hiring manager when you have an open position on your team?
Yeah, I would say that, and we get into the process here in a little bit as well, Zakarias, but I would say one thing you should do is, number one, understand why, right? So why is this position open? Is it because someone left? Is it we're adding new headcount to the team? If so, why is that headcount being added? Is it because the company is growing? Is it because the responsibilities of the function is growing? Is it because the workload is just frankly more for your particular department, right? So really understanding the why, which will dictate, how you look at the role you're recruiting for, what type of person you need, how you're going to pay that individual. There's so many answers, that'll come from that sort of key definition of why is the position open, right?
Thank you so much. Let's understand the why, everyone.
Yeah.
And my next question for you, Jonas, is, can you talk us through what an ideal recruitment process should look like to attract top talents?
Yeah, happy to. So I put on here, like, fast, fun, flexible are the top things I put on the slide. So I would just say, yeah, keep an open mind when you go into recruiting for somebody, and know that you're always competing for this talent, right? So even if you're going after a candidate that is not actively looking, is dying to come to work for you, still run the process as if the person was looking at 10 other jobs and you needed to win them over. I would just say, really look at it as a competitive process. So we sort of break this down, right? So number one is define the need. We talked about that a little bit, and it's something that as a search firm, we spend a lot of time with our clients really understanding, why is the position open? What are you looking for? Personality, experiences, key skill sets that they need to have, right? So really defining that, the type of candidate you want to bring into the company is really the key step. And you have to start there, right? And that'll really dictate what type of search strategy you're going to take, right? How are you going to locate this person? Are you hiring a firm? Are you moving somebody internally within your organization because they know where all the skeletons are buried, right? So sometimes it's really smart to move people internally in an organization. But if you haven't defined the need, you don't know if that right candidate really exists inside your company, right? And so once you know what you're looking for, really sort of define that search strategy, understand, are we going to post a position? Are we going to hire a search firm to help us? Or are we going to move someone internally? And that really, both of those things should really kind of occur in real time. As you need to go out and recruit for the individual. So I think we typically look at that as a 2-day process, right? It's something that takes place pretty quickly. And then third step is really sourcing for candidates, right? This is by any means necessary, whatever you got to do to go out and locate and start recruiting this individual, knowing that, as we talked about, right, you're selling to those candidates, why they should come to work for you. Sometimes postings work great, right? Putting out a job posting on a, very specific site for a specific candidate may uncover great candidates. Sometimes you don't get anything out of postings and you need to be more proactive. Maybe you need to call all the industry experts, and ask them for referrals on a particular search. So there's lots of ways you can uncover candidates, and really using the strategy that works best for that particular role, I think is key. And I'll give an example. I mean, we recently ran a CFO search down in Dallas, Texas area, and we posted it because it's a big market and they have a lot of potential candidates down there. And I think we received 2,000 applicants within the first 3 days. And it was just a massive amount of information to go through. We tried to do the same thing down in sort of the more rural parts of Texas a couple months later, and received 2 applicants over 3 months, right? And so it's just to illustrate, sometimes postings work really well, right? And sometimes they don't. Fourth step in the process, really evaluate and assess these candidates, right? And so I think having a plan in place when you start, how are the candidates going to go through the interview process? Who will they be meeting with? What's the timeline? Are we doing this virtual, in person? Are we getting the candidates assessed through a psychological assessment? All these things are great, but it's good to know it going into the process so you kind of have a plan for how you're going to execute this thing. Because I tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than for a candidate to think they're going into a final round interview and maybe get an offer in a day or two, realizing that there actually are 3 more steps and, a psych assessment and then a drug screen, and then maybe they get an offer if they go through those steps really well, right? So really have a plan in place before you start so you can manage expectations accordingly. At any point in time, you're going to have to be ready to negotiate that offer. Things can move really quickly, right? So be prepared for that. If you're a line manager hiring someone, you may have to get approval from HR or approval from your direct managers. So I would say make the plan ahead of time so you know kind of what the guardrails are that you need to work within. An HR department should have existing salary bands and title options and structure of the position, et cetera. So sometimes it can be quite straightforward, but I'd say be ready to negotiate that offer, and leverage whatever search partner, if you're working with the firm, at the time where you negotiate the offer is not the time to just try to do everything yourself. It's really beneficial to leverage your partners out there when you're going through that step. And then I'd say the typical, you got to button up your background checks, references, try to move as quick as you can throughout this step of the process because the candidate's likely just in sort of waiting mode. And then I'd say lastly, staying in close contact with that final candidate through the onboarding, their notice period until they actually start. As someone that does this, every day, we typically say at least once a week through the notice period, you want to have a meaningful, conversation with that candidate. Maybe it's a coffee one morning, maybe it's just a phone call, but really staying in front of that candidate until their start date is pretty darn important.
Thank you so much for the answer, Jonas. And I feel like after you're telling me this, I want to be in the recruitment process. If it's fun, fast, and flexible, then what else can you look for?
Yeah.
And during the last answer, you mentioned the external recruitment. And when would you say, and how should companies use those external recruitment firms for help? And what are the options out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And certainly using an outside firm is not something you want to do every time because it can get quite costly, right? And so I think the time to do it is if you have certain challenges associated with the search, right? Either you have really fast timelines, you have, you're going to have a shortage of talent out there, and it's going to be very, very competitive to find the right person. Maybe it's an extremely unique skill set you're looking for. Or maybe you want to structure it in a, contract to hire kind of way. There's lots of reasons, right? But I think generally speaking, if there's some type of challenge or, that's a little bit less straightforward than typical, it can very often help to use an outside search firm. And so essentially there are three options. Now this is very, oversimplified this, right? There are lots of types of contingency firms, lots of types of RPO, and lots of types of retained search firms. But essentially there are three buckets of firms. A contingency search firm, often referred to as a staffing firm. Essentially, what defines them is they get paid upon successful completion of a recruitment, right? So the only time a hiring manager would pay the contingency firm is when the offer has been signed, sealed, delivered, and the candidate's coming to work for you. Up until then, it costs $0. Usually pretty fast timelines. Fee levels may be around 20 to 25%, depending on the difficulty of the search. And usually these are lower to mid-level type of positions. And contingency firms are really good at managing what I would call an inventory of candidates, right? So just know that what they do on a daily basis is they will have hundreds of candidates typically that they are in constant communication with. They're evaluating them, they're speaking to them, they know these candidates, and they are trying to place these candidates into certain jobs. What they're not great at is starting from scratch with no candidates and going out and hunting for those candidates because they're not incentivized in that way, right? They're incentivized to keep a good talent pool, in inventory, and in the fastest way possible, place those candidates in good positions. So that's kind of how they work. An RPO firm stands for recruitment process outsourcing. It's a type of contingency firm, but it's usually used for sort of mass hire or hiring events, right? Where let's say you have a company that's just built a brand new distribution center and they need to hire 1,000 people at that location. Typically can help to hire a RPO firm that will come on site and run the entire career day or days and bring in and screen and go through the background check of just hundreds of people to bring them inside of the facility. Typically high volume situations, usually it is lower level, kind of low skilled type labor, really quick timelines, and can be quite affordable, right? We typically see about 15 to 18% fees on that. Retained search firm, which is the kind of firm that I work for, typically is used for executive level hires. By the name, you can infer you're paid on a retained basis, and so typically there's an installment up front, and then we get paid on sort of milestones throughout the search. And industry standard fees are 30 to sometimes up to 35%. So it's quite costly. There's probably a certain level of position inside a company that it makes sense to use a retained search firm. And typically it's much longer timelines. We're talking probably months, not weeks. And best used for high-level positions where you're going to have to go out and start from scratch and hunt down the right person for your company. So that's typically when you'd use kind of a retained search firm. And there are benefits to all, and there are downsides to all, basically.
Thank you so much for that answer, Jonas. And I think we all have learned that there are different ways to use those external resources. And we actually got a question from one in the chat. He's currently on a train, so he asked me to ask it out loud. So David asks you, Jonas, what this 20% means. Is it based on the candidate's annual salary, or how does it work?
Yeah, exactly. So the percentage fee there is based off of, typically it's first year cash compensation is what we say, but if they're not, compensated with the bonus, it would be their base salary. So if someone is paid $100,000 and the fee is 20%, $20,000 is what the fee for that placement would be.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. My next question for you, Jonas, is what are some tips you can give companies and hiring managers out there to recruit even better?
Yeah. I'd really go back to that sort of fast, fun, and flexible approach. I would say flexibility is key, particularly in today's market where searches are moving really quickly. And we see this all the time where we'll run a search and a client says, Jonas, I can't interview the candidate next week, but I can do it the week after that. So can we schedule something 2 weeks out? And then, sure, we schedule it, the candidate is on board, and then turns out that a week later, candidate calls us and says, well, another hiring manager, another company has swooped in, they flew me out there, on Tuesday, and I'm now entertaining an offer, right? And so the way to not get in that situation, there's nothing you can do to completely avoid it, but the way to compete for talent here is to be flexible and then try your best to adjust that schedule and make it happen within the right timeline that works for that candidate, right? And so I say that it's obviously, I'm working in this field full time, and so it's easy for me to say prioritize it, right? But I think as a hiring manager, just understand that if you're not able to be flexible, if you can't prioritize it, then likely you'll get into situations where you might lose out on talent because you weren't able to speed up the process there, right? And the other thing I would say is really to be prepared going into a search, have all your key partners on your team with you and committed. There's nothing worse than having to wait for approval for some other team member that sits across the building at the final hour to wait to put together an offer for that candidate. You want to have everybody on the bus at the same time, and so that you can move quickly when the time calls for it.
That's great. We'll take all these tips into account. And Jonas, we got some questions here from Riber. And his first question is, where do you find these talents? Is it basically most from competitors, or where are they?
Yeah, great question. So I think depends on what kind of firm you are, right? So the way that I work is, most of our candidates will be found in some type of online database, right? So LinkedIn is the most famous one, where I think that the numbers are pretty staggering. If you look internationally, they may be even better. Like in Australia, I think 99% of every professional out there has a LinkedIn presence. In the US, the percentage is more like 75%. In China, it's 13%, right? And so here in the US, LinkedIn is a suitable database to go after candidates, make introductions, try to recruit them. But there are other databases in certain industries that we can leverage to try to find them. For instance, when we're working in the private equity field, we could use something like PitchBook, for instance, that tracks all financial transactions out there. And so we'll use that database to try to uncover key talent. But then, for a firm like us, basically what we do is we cold call people. We, by any means necessary, like I mentioned, we try to get in touch with these people and sell them on the opportunities that we are representing. For other levels of positions, having a posting out there and sort of sifting through applicants is another useful way that somebody could find candidates, right?
That's really good. Because I have an additional question to that. Would you say that there's been a shift now that recruiters are looking for the candidates rather than the candidates looking for the company?
Yes, to some extent. I would say really attractive opportunities will still get a lot of interest from candidates. So if you look at the really attractive roles like being a CEO, being a CFO, being the head of a function is always an attractive opportunity for folks, and therefore will generate a lot of interest from candidates. If you look at mid-level management and down, if you look at entry-level type of roles, that's where you see, you drive down the interstate and you may have, sign-on bonuses available upon hire, even. So I think the level of competitiveness kind of gets up there when we talk about, higher level positions, particularly from candidates, right?
That's really interesting. Ruben has multiple questions, but I'll ask you his second question.
Yeah.
Jonas, do you believe that you can trust references?
A great question. So it depends on what kind of references that you do. I would say if you ask a candidate to provide references, you have to take them with some grain of salt, because few people would give you bad references, right? So these are going to be people that they have good relationships with, that they've worked with in the past, will be friends on some level probably, and will be inclined to give the most favorable review they can of that candidate. So we always take references with the grain of salt, right? It's one page in the picture album of that candidate. And it may give you a couple of, nuggets of information that you could use. I think having the right person call those references and ask probing questions and maybe push a little bit, challenge the individual, can uncover a couple of things. But in essence, they will likely be quite favorable. There's something called back channel referencing, which is not really endorsed by the industry, but people do it. It could be done, is where you essentially just pick up the phone and call somebody that worked with the person, but the candidate did not provide that individual. That's a pretty slippery slope, because you're going to get a very honest answer, probably. But the candidate might not like it. So proceed with caution, I would say, if you end up going down the route of sort of back channel referencing, because candidates are not used to it and it could end up backfiring on you.
We need to take care of our candidates as well. We don't want to lose them on the way.
Yeah, that's right.
We have another question here from Adiba. How valuable are assessments such as 360, objective assessments, attitude tests, and etc.?
Yeah, it's very common that hiring managers and companies use them. I would say the same thing as with references. It's one picture in the picture album. It's a data point. It is not a end all be all of the recruitment process, but could be useful if incorporated in the right way. I have my own preference for the types of assessments. I like using ones that are more descriptive, leadership inventories or personality assessments. I prefer not to use ones that give you kind of a hire, no hire type of recommendation or decision. I think it should be used as a, qualitative type of measure, even though a lot of assessment tools try to be sort of the data provider in the process, right? As sort of the comparison to doing an in-person traditional interview is an assessment, because you get more of data on that candidate. But it's, it's right to use it in some instances. And in general, I would say candidates do not prefer to take intelligence tests. And so we have plenty of clients that take both a leadership inventory and an intelligence test. And generally speaking, candidates don't love those. And so that can present a bit of a challenge for the hiring team. So I would recommend using assessments for kind of, your finalist group of candidates, maybe. So kind of later stage in the process.
Okay, that's really good. Ediben has a final question here for the moment, at least.
Yeah.
How important is knowledge within your line of business for top positions?
I mean, inevitable, you need to have, good knowledge of your, and be in command of that knowledge of your position, your work history, and what the job entails that you're applying or interviewing for. But that's not just it, right? I think what's interesting about an interview process is typically the candidates that win are able to show both command of their knowledge and experience, but also the personality, the presence, the way they present themselves through that interview process is what really wins them the job. So I would say it's probably split 50-50, how you present and act during the interview process and what your knowledge and command of that knowledge is within your particular field. Now, again, that may differ a little bit based on positions. So that's, based on kind of what I see. I would think if you're going in for a highly technical development role in software, then probably the key skill set you have and the technical knowledge, perhaps it's more important than, how you act and sort of commingle with your teammates.
That's really good. Thank you for the answer. I have one final question for you here, Jonas, and I know, at least for my own sake, I'd love to hear a good answer here. And I think a lot of other people also would like to hear. Do you have any good tips for candidates that might be looking for a new role or considering a change?
Yeah, sure. So a couple here. I mean, I would, my number one tip to people is act like it's still a competitive situation. Even if you have a relationship with that person, you maybe feel confident that you're going to get the job, still act like it's competitive, put your best foot forward and be really professional through a process. We see candidates get into all kinds of trouble for simply not proofreading their emails. So even though you have, sent with my iPhone or sent by iPhone on there, it doesn't mean that, you should misspell or write strange things in an email, right? So still be professional, proof your communication, be accurate and on time. I'd say those things still hold as much as ever, right? And I would coach people in general to be really decisive. Companies are decisive when they hire people. They typically know what they want. And as a candidate, I would encourage you to know what you want too, so that you can determine whether that job is the right fit for you. And you should be allowed to withdraw or remove yourself from a search at any time if you feel like that job or company is not what you're looking for. But I would encourage you to be decisive. This is typically a pretty sticky one for most people that are not used or comfortable discussing compensation. I would encourage anybody to be prepared to talk about it from the moment you enter the interview process to the very end. Be ready to talk about compensation, be educated on the market and what the role should pay so that you have some data points and references there. And know kind of what you're going to say if you get asked certain questions. And I would also say leverage your search partners, kind of what I put in here, but the search firm, whether they're an external one like myself or they're the internal HR team, they are really your friends in this process. And so lean on them, leverage them, ask them for advice. Even if they are an internal HR recruiter with the company, they are still going to do what's in your best interest to manage that search process. So ask them questions about the expectation and timeline and the steps and when they would want references. You should kind of take the lead on some of those things as well, right? So those are sort of some high level tips, but happy to field any other questions on this. I know particularly compensation, we get a lot of questions from candidates about, right? So happy to answer any more questions about it.
That's really good. Thank you so much, Jonas. Felicia is actually raising her hand. So please unmute yourself and can we see you guys? So awesome.
Yes. Hey, Jonas. So I recently became manager for a company. I've handled their finances for a long time and now I'm managing. So I also have a personnel responsibility. So this is a new area for me. And it's a Swedish company. So we will be hiring. Right now, we're still using a lot of the Swedish resources, but our plan is to grow here in the US, so to hire US talent. And it's very competitive now. So in writing my job ad, I want to be competitive, but also save some for negotiations. So I'm wondering, what should we save for the later part of negotiation? Should it be salary, or should it be bonuses? Flexibility and work remotely, vacation time. What's most important to be like upfront?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way we manage it is we typically advertise or put in postings the components of the job offer, not what the numbers are, right? I mean, I know there's a trend out there to write the salary level or salary band right away in your posting, and some companies can do that if they're very, very well informed. But we typically write something like, competitive base salary, full benefit package, annual incentive bonus, equity, long-term incentive, stock option plans. So I think it's worth noting the different components to the offer. What are, not what the levels are, but what are the components? Because if you write something like, great vacation policy, you don't know what your winning candidate current vacation policy is. So they may be underwhelmed by your offer if you think 3 weeks is super competitive and they have 5 today, right? So I think it's just kind of managing the expectations a little bit and not showing all your cards right away. So that's why I would say list the components, and then, you can hold back with the levels until it's time to really start having a one-on-one discussion with that candidate about it.
All right, thanks. And another question. Do you have any suggestions for online courses on HR, just to get the kind of both, from a strategic perspective, sort of what you do, and also from a compliance end?
Yeah. There's a couple of resources out there. I think as a manager, you'll probably not be asked to be the sort of the standing HR specialist in the field, but you need to know enough to be dangerous, is how I would call it. And so there are resources through local employer associations. So that's usually one that could be a good local resource. There's the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM is the abbreviation, and great resource, lots of courses you can take on HR, state level and sort of national level courses. If it's more on, the more of the talent side of HR, like, performance management and doing things like succession planning and training as a new manager, I'd encourage you to look through sort of the LinkedIn resources. They have great programs that you can go and sort of take courses from other professionals out there. So it just depends a little bit on, I'd encourage you to more on the employers associations and SHRM resources for more, legal, HR matters, and maybe something like LinkedIn for more of the management training side.
All right, great. Thanks, Jonas.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you for that answer, Jonas. I have another question from David here on the train. He would like you to give your opinion about this. How does the triangle compare to the Boston area when it comes to attracting talents? And how do these two geographic areas differ when it comes to candidates' compensation expectations?
Yeah. So in general, I would say that the southeast of the United States has become a much more attractive place to recruit candidates to. So that would include markets like the Triangle, like Charlotte, Atlanta, Florida, Texas, and in between, right? So these sort of, really tier 1 or tier 2 cities in the southeast have become really attractive places to recruit people to, right? Now, I will say the compensation levels are quite different. The larger cities in the US still on average pay much more for their talent than particularly the southeast. So I don't know exactly what the cost of living difference would be. You could run those calculators, online, but I would probably say that you might have to pay someone even 20% more on base salary to make up for kind of the comp levels between a Triangle and a Boston market. And we typically coach our clients too to, even though you're recruiting them from a really expensive place to live to a more affordable place to live, candidates are extremely reluctant to take a pay cut in order to make that move, right? So their perspective on that change is going to be different from yours as a hiring manager. So it's still about recruiting that person, making the offer attractive, knowing that it may benefit them that they're moving in the right direction, so to speak, and will have improved their cost of living, but they're still going to be reluctant to take a pay cut.
That's crazy. Thank you for that, Jonas.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, sorry.
This is still. Can I make a comment, or is that out of question? So my experience is, let's say you have a vice president in Boston, and they would pay $300,000 a year for this person. San Francisco would offer maybe $160,000, $170,000. And the Research Triangle Park might pay $140,000. That's how big the differences can be. And just because it's San Francisco and extremely expensive doesn't mean that they pay well. So they pay much better in Boston, New York, New Jersey than they pay in Northern California, even Southern California. I don't know, Jonas, is that your experience too?
A little bit. I also think it depends on the industry, right?
Yeah.
And if, recruiting in the tech sector versus pharmaceutical, I think geography will kind of dictate the comp level there too. So yeah, Boston is certainly it's a really expensive place to live, and salary ranges up there have been high for a long time. So
yeah, okay.
It looks like Felicia has another question there.
No, I'm sorry. I'm good. I got answers to my questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then I have a final question here for you, Jonas, before we let you go. It's from Riber, and do you want to unmute yourself, Riber, and ask it yourself, or should I read it?
It's okay. You can read the question.
Okay. Jonas, the question is, do you ever get requests to maintain a position until the company find a replacement? And this is particular for high-level positions.
I'm guessing you're referring to like an interim option where, you place an executive for
like a C-suit or something, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So our firm in particular, we don't do that kind of work. There are other retained firms or executive search firms that will have kind of an interim practice that will run those types of recruitments. But again, that will mean really you have to, if you're going to run an interim practice, you have to maintain an inventory of qualified candidates who can at a moment's notice really jump in and do that work. So it's a little bit different. It is much harder to do from our sort of business perspective. It's harder to do that for executive level roles than it is for junior or mid-level management, where people might be comfortable working on a contract or shorter time periods. Most executives will want a permanent, full-time, kind of meaningful role, which is why we've chosen to stay away from kind of an interim executive practice. But there are firms out there that do that type of work, so it definitely exists. It could be a nice way to kind of bridge the gap while you are looking for that permanent executive.
Thank you so much for that answer, Jonas. And thank you so much for participating today. I've learned so much, and I know that me and Sophie that are about to enter our career have learned a lot for our future recruitment processes. And I hope you all who participated have learned a lot as well, and that you can be top recruiters in just a week or two. Jonas, do you have any final words for our audience?
Thank you for having. Yeah, thank you for having me. Feel free to, Zakarias, if you want to share contact information with anyone in attendance, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Happy to keep the connection going.